In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt created the nation's first national monument designation. The purpose of this designation was to preserve for all Americans significant pieces of the country's history. Ecology, geology, and beauty. All national monuments are designated by U.S. presidents and are chosen as their personal memorials of those most special parts of this great country. Memorials that they saw a need to protect over all others. Some are big. Some are small. Some garner large budgets and staff. Others next to none. All were chosen by presidents who considered them the most important places to protect over all other places in the country. America's national monuments tell the story of the nation's past and present glory. In Legacy of the Great Plains, we will visit the 10 monuments associated with America's once vast grasslands.
When President Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from the French in 1803, he essentially added the Great Plains to the United States of America. From that point on, Americans looked to form a nation from sea to sea, a great continental nation. This push west was called Manifest Destiny. 2 national monuments commemorate the heroic struggle of ordinary Americans to fulfill the American dream of manifest destiny. Join me, Bo Svensson, as we learn the story of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who crossed and settled the Great Plains. Of all monuments in the national park system, none captures the essence of the American character better than Scottsbluff National Monument. It's a testament to the 500,000 people who gave up everything to travel the Oregon Trail to California, Utah, Washington, and Oregon in search of a new and better life.
The years are 1841 to 1869, and for the 500,000 immigrants traveling the Oregon Trail, after days of walking the flat, dusty plains, suddenly, a rising corner of the Nebraska Panhandle, the monument was established in 1919 by President Woodrow Wilson. Pinched between soaring rocky cliffs on the south and the wide Platte River on the north, all the immigrants that traveled the Oregon Trail were funneled through Mitchell Pass and by the spectacular landforms that make up Scottsbluff National Monument. Here rises up a majestic display of pinnacles, bluffs, mesas, buttes, and badlands. In the morning fog, the monument's peaks form islands in the sky. When the fog clears, Scottsbluff, the Gibraltar of the Great Plains, reflects majestically in the North Platte River, the lifeblood of the Oregon Trail. But the monument is more than just a bouquet of rich visual delights. It is the spectacular formations that are the centerpiece of Scotts Bluff National Monument are the result of two geological processes. First, the building up of sediments as a result of the rising up of the Rocky Mountains. And second, the weathering away of the same sediments after the mountain building process stopped.
So what you see today of Scotts Bluff was a combination of deposition or building up of river sediment, volcanic ash, and wind-blown dust, today sandstone, that kept the general topography level, but it increased in elevation. All of this coming out of the Rocky Mountains. But when the Rocky Mountains stopped growing, then the forces of erosion took over, and is simply a wearing away of what was here. For example, the top of the bluff at one time was the surface of the ground, and everything around it has worn away. When I talk to school groups about geology, I sort of compare it as building a wedding cake, adding layer upon layer of icing and cake and icing and cake, and that's how we built up the park or the monument today. But then as you cut away pieces by erosion, then you expose all of these different layers of geologic history.
As the immigrants started west on the journey to Oregon and California, they found themselves traveling through the tall grass prairie, lush grasses and forbs. But as they pushed west, they entered the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and the climate became drier. By the time the wagon trains reached Mitchell Pass here at Scotts Bluff National Monument, they were into the mixed grass prairie, shorter grasses dominated by little blue stem, yucca, and low-lying cactus. At that time, the primary animal on the plains would have been the buffalo. North of the monument's bluffs flows the North Platte River. The river is its own unique aquatic ecosystem, supporting an abundance of fish, reptiles, and waterfowl. Water is the Great Plains' scarcest resource, and for the immigrants, the river not only led the way west, but it also provided the travelers with the critical water supply for themselves and their animals. Next to the California. Collectively known as the Overland Trails, these routes were also known by their particular destinations: the Oregon Trail, the Mormon Trail, and the California Trail, those that would lead to their respective destinations. Who made this trip?
But as a pioneer woman, as I read their diaries, I realized they had to be very resourceful in what they did. If they ran out or these things got wet, they had to come up with a way to feed their family. No question of the roles. I'm going to cook, I'm going to take care of the kids, and you're going to yoke the oxen in the morning and take care of the animals, because I can't do that.
These families' journeys across the Great Plains, over the South Pass and through the mountains, began in early spring when the prairie grasses were at their lushest. Traveling in caravans, the immigrants could average 16 miles a day with oxen and twice that with the more expensive mules. What did the typical family traveling the Oregon Trail take on the trip?
I'm going to take lots of bacon. About at this point, I've had some root vegetables from my garden that may have lasted to here. I may have potatoes and carrots and onions and even a few eggs left. But much beyond here, then those things would be dwindling. Because I know, and then we'll use that because I'm not going to have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. So my trunks are in here, and I'm going to have some clothing items in there, lots of blankets and shoes, I guess the normal things that we would take if we were going.
When the caravans reached Scotts Bluff, they had covered approximately 1/3 of their journey. except for the brutal Cheyenne attacks, which shut down the trail during the summer of 1864. Indian raids along the trail were virtually non-existent. Nevertheless, the trip during the 40-year history of the trail was risky. It is estimated that 50,000 men, women, and children died or simply disappeared pursuing the American dream.
So you could have, based on Ford estimates at Fort Laramie and Fort Kearney, anywhere between 300 to 600 wagons a day coming down through here through this pass. And it
was the Mormon Trail, often traveling on the north side of the Platte River. The poorer Mormon families used their men to pull carts, carrying their goods on their way to Utah. For 18 months, the Oregon Trail and its branch into California, daring and flamboyant men, carried the mail and the communications between the Union Army in the East and the troops stationed in California during the beginning of America's Civil War. By 1869, the telegraph and the railroads had replaced the great overland trails west. However, at Scotts Bluff, today as we look at the wagon ruts left behind, or glance down on remnants of the trail itself, we can only wonder, how did they do it?
Abraham Lincoln is perhaps the greatest of all American presidents. By sheer force of will, he held the Union together, ended slavery, and won the Civil War for the North. Lesser known is that he paved the way for settlement of the Great Plains and gave women, for the first time, property rights. This bold step was called the Homestead Act, and its beginnings are preserved at Homestead National Monument.
Tucked within the rural farmlands of eastern Nebraska, Homestead National Monument commemorates an American ideal, perhaps the American ideal, private ownership of the land. As Thomas Jefferson saw it, yeoman farmers working their own land and in the process providing an enlightened democratic citizenry. On the spot near this log cabin, Daniel Freeman successfully filed the first claim to acquire free land under the 1862 Homestead Act. It marked the beginning of the greatest wave of pioneer immigration the nation would ever see in the settling of the last great American frontier. By the end of the 19th century, hundreds of settlers would swell to millions as the Great Plains fell to the steel plow and the grazing of cattle. Many, like Daniel Freeman, would send their children to one-room schoolhouses, such as the brick Freeman Schoolhouse, preserved within the monument boundaries. Most would live in houses built with sod bricks, cut from the sturdy prairie terrain. Homestead National Monument also commemorates the passage of a former glory of the country's largest prehistoric ecosystem, the prairie. Nearly extinct at the time of the Dust Bowl and the Depression, a small piece of this prairie ecosystem was brought back to life with the establishment of Homestead National Monument by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1936. Here, the second oldest restored tall grass prairie ecosystem in the nation comes to life in the spring and early summer, with an ever-changing parade of color from its hundreds of flowering plants. By August, the dominant tall grasses are ready to bloom. And by fall, the tall grass prairie at Homestead National Monument is in its full splendor. Vibrant with magnificent fall colors, blazing scarlets, deep purples, and golden bronzes in the setting sun. The grasses now reach over 7 feet in height. A plethora of insects move from plant to plant. Nearby, the prairie grasses blend into an oak savanna, and then into a deciduous forest along Club Creek. Autumn, the time of harvest, has indeed come to the Great Plains, the nation's breadbasket and Homestead National Monument. Prior to the Civil War, American homesteading pioneers pushed across the overland trails to California and Oregon. On their way, they passed through the Great Plains, or what had been known as the Great American Desert, nearly 500,000 square miles of grasslands that made up the bulk of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. Now, with the Civil War raging, Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party made a bold move: give away chunks of the last unsettled region of the country to anyone willing to work the land. Politically, it was a means to create new non-slave states. For millions of Americans and immigrants, it became a way to get a piece of the American dream. It was the Homestead Act of 1862. What did the new law do?
It provided the opportunity for people to go out and stake a claim on 160 acres of government surveyed land. They had to live on the land, and they had to live there for 5 years. They had to make improvements, which meant build a home and farm it, plant some crops. If they claimed 160 acres, they had to farm a minimum of 10 acres. And after 5 years, if they met all the requirements of the law, then the land was theirs. They called it free land. But it actually exacted a high price, not only on the land itself, but also onto the people, because the people who went out and staked a claim struggled against the elements themselves, whether it was drought or grasshopper invasions. There were 2 million claims filed under the Homestead Act in 30 different states, but less than half were successful, only 40%.
The main reason the Great Plains remained unsettled into the middle of the 19th century was that it was virtually impossible to plow the thick prairie sod. That changed with John Deere's invention of his radical new steel plow in 1847.
In the middle 19th century, between 1873 on, homesteaders were using steel plows. They would use a yoke of oxen to turn the soil. Now, a homesteader who had to farm a minimum of 10 acres would walk 10 miles just to plow 1 acre. So if they had to plow a minimum of 10 acres, they were just walking 100 miles to just turn the soil. Then they would have to go back and plant the seed, and then they would have to go back and tend to their crops. It was brutal. It was extremely difficult, not an easy thing to do.
In the 1800s, Solomon Butcher was the Ansel Adams of the Great Plains. With his camera, he captured homesteading life on the prairie, particularly the sod houses made from bricks of prairie grass. Perhaps the most famous of the Butcher photos is of the Chrisman sisters, 4 sisters who homesteaded over 1,000 acres of land near Homestead National Monument. Through the Homestead Act, for the first time, American women were able to acquire and own land on their own. It was a pivotal turning point in women's battle for equal rights. Life on the prairie is also captured through a series of original paintings on display in the monument's visitor center. As the homesteaders pushed west, the first community structure they often built was the one-room schoolhouse, like the Freeman Schoolhouse, preserved at Homestead National Monument. More than just schools, these one-room buildings were the center of community politics and society on the Great Plains.
Part of Homestead National Monument of America is the Freeman School. It's a one-room school built in 1872. When homesteaders began to spread west and develop their homesteads, they brought their families with them, and they understood the value of education. The school functioned as a one-room school all the way up until 1967. It was a typical kindergarten through 8th grade school. But it was also the community center. It was the place where speeches were made, and they also cast their votes here, and church was held here. This particular school is on the National Register of Historic Places because it was one of the very first schools in the entire nation to issue standardized textbooks to their students.
Over the Freeman School's nearly 100-year history, the students carved their initials in the bricks. In a mere 40 years after the passage of the Homestead Act, the Great Plains was settled. The next century would see it become America's breadbasket, feeding not only the country, but also the world. The science at Homestead National Monument centers on the prairie. Since Homestead began restoring their prairie in 1939, scientists have come to learn much about this unique ecosystem. When the Rocky Mountains rose up, forming the western edge of the Great Plains, they blocked the western flow of warm, moist air. The rain shadow effect of these towering, snow-capped peaks produced the Great Plains' arid climate that favored the growth of grasses over trees. The result was the greatest grassland on Earth, covering over 1/4 of the continental United States. So far, over 30 species of grasses and 300 species of forbs, colorful wildflowers, have been identified in the tall grass prairies of Homestead National Monument, as well as numerous insects and birds. From east to west, the prairie biome is divided into 3 subdivisions: the tall grass prairie, now forming the Corn Belt, the mixed grass prairie, where wheat and soybeans are grown, and the short grass prairie, which is primarily used for grazing cattle. What's remarkable about the tall grass prairie is its productivity. No other ecosystem produces more biomass per acre. Impressive as it is to see grasses rise up to over 7 feet in height, it's what goes on underground that makes the prairie so unique. Underneath is a massive root system, sometimes extending 15 feet below the surface. A root system that over millions of years produced more nutrient-rich topsoil than any other ecosystem on the planet. It is this topsoil that forms the basis of the greatest agricultural economy in the world. However, if it took tens of millions of years to build up this topsoil in the prairie biome, it took only 150 years to drive it to near extinction. Like the millions of buffalo that once roamed the vast prairie, only 1/2% of this ecosystem remains today.
So in 1939, Homestead National Monument began to restore this tall grass prairie. They planted seed, and then they took sod from already established prairie to areas that were extremely eroded. And so over a period of many, many years, the land managers here at Homestead have continually watched the prairie. One of the things that we have done here at Homestead National Monument is, again, reintroduce fire onto the prairie to mimic what nature would do. In fact, just last week we burned about 1/3 of the prairie. And as you walk through and look at where we burned, you can already see really nice green grasses starting to come back up.
In the 1930s, a new movement arose to protect and restore small pieces of the once great American prairie. Like all endangered ecosystems, the prairie deserves to survive in its own right. But its survival is also in our best interests. Perhaps hidden among its wildflowers or grasses lies a cure for an unknown disease. Indeed, already the prairie's purple coneflower, echinacea, is used to boost the human immune system.
Thanks for joining me on our tour of how the Great Plains were settled and the national monuments that tell the dramatic story of this wonderful piece of American history. I'm Bo Svensson.